Every time you go to the gas pump, you're paying a 45-cent a gallon state tax. That money goes from your credit card to the gas station to the state of New York. It is the next leg of the journey that is somewhat problematic. In some ways, it seems to just disappear. And tonight, we've got the numbers from the New York State Comptroller's Office to prove it, all because you paid for it. Take a drive and take a look. Crumbling roads and bridges abound across the capital region. That's where the New York State Dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund should come in. It's funded by all sorts of taxes and fees. The gas tax you pay every time you fill up your car, vehicle registration fees, car rental taxes, and more. Just one problem. The Dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund is dedicated to just about anything but highways and bridges.
It's outrageous.
State Senator Michelle Hinchy reacting to the newly obtained numbers that show very little of that fund actually goes to highway and bridge repair. Most of it takes a detour once it gets to Albany to balance the books at places like New York State DOT and DMV and to pay off borrowing. We've got the actual numbers in this handy pie chart. 40.1% to debt service, a whopping 42.7% to operational costs at DOT and DMV, and just 17.2% mere crumbs to take care of the highways and bridges you travel over every day.
We have roads and bridges that have not been repaired for decades. We need that funding to come directly to our infrastructure.
It's the same sentiment from the other side of the aisle. Before he was a state senator, then Supervisor Peter Oberacher chaired the Otsego County Public Works Committee.
Public safety, first responders, we all use the roads. They're terrible.
It's a rough ride in many parts of his district. Case in point, I-88.
If you've ever driven I-88 in the lower portion there, you want to make sure you're buckled in because you're in for a ride.
So are taxpayers being taken for a ride? New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli has tracked the dedicated fund for years.
We've been concerned about the use of that fund for a long time. You know, that lockbox, unfortunately, has been used for other purposes. It should really be a pay-as-you-go source of funding to deal with our infrastructure needs.
The law establishing the fund says the tax and fee money is to be used for reconstruction, replacement, reconditioning, restoration, rehabilitation, and preservation. It doesn't mention correcting bad budgeting.
We know that those taxes are supposed to be dedicated to this fund, so when they're not, it's shortchanging the purpose of why you even have the fund.
Johnny Evers represents men and women who want to play a role in that reconstruction and restoration, the American Council of Engineering Companies of New York. He is one of many who want the fund to revert to its intended purpose.
It's designed to be something that continually is replenished and spent on roads and bridges. And if it's not, then it's not living up to the intent of the law.
Now, $1 billion of the fund goes to the State Department of Transportation for those operational costs. We asked DOT for an interview, but we received this statement instead. New York State DOT maximizes the use of highway and bridge funding in order to bring the most possible improvements to our infrastructure to enhance safety, mobility, and resiliency, and any suggestion otherwise is categorically false. Now, the funding is all controlled by state lawmakers, and you can see they're not too happy right now. If ever there was a chance to get this dedicated fund rededicated to repairing roads and bridges, now might be that time, with the state budget due in just a month and the state in line for a huge influx of funds from the recently enacted Federal Infrastructure Act. But if history is our guide, don't count on it. With now former Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin facing federal charges, you can add him to the ranks of New York State politicians forced to leave office after being accused of corruption or other misdeeds. You know about Andrew Cuomo. Before that, it was Governor Elliott Spitzer, brought down by a prostitution scandal. And the man who replaced him, David Patterson, dropped his run for a full term as governor after a series of ethical questions. Now, to tell the full stories of all the lawmakers convicted of corruption, we would need a longer newscast. The doors of the state Capitol Hall of Shame are bursting at the seams. For years, they were the two most powerful men in the state legislature, Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver and Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos, both convicted on corruption charges. Silver recently passed away while still serving his federal prison sentence. Skelos remains at home on Long Island under house arrest. They are certainly not alone. We found at least 17 other former state lawmakers convicted of a variety of crimes, most of those crimes corruption related. There are two other former Senate Majority Leaders on the list, Malcolm Smith, Smith, guilty of corruption, and Pedro Espada. He embezzled millions from a health clinic to fund a lavish lifestyle. There is former Assemblymember Alan Hevesy, who went on to become the state controller. He was convicted of corruption. There's former Senator Carl Kruger, who once told me he couldn't get enough taxpayer money to decorate his office.
You'd like to spend more money, you're saying?
I would love to spend more money, but unfortunately we don't have it to spend.
Not too long after that, Kruger was convicted of federal corruption charges. How about convicted former member of the Assembly William Scarborough? He wasn't happy when we confronted him with expense records that turned out to be fraudulent and criminal.
I think this is a gotcha. That's what I think.
And there is one of the most corrupt state lawmakers we have ever covered, former Assemblymember William Boylan. He of the phony per diem and travel expense submissions.
I just off the top of your head?
Clue as to what you are speaking to. I saw your report. The report made no sense to me.
Boylan, still serving a 14-year term, is now under home confinement. While most of the crimes involved corruption, a few did not, as was the case with former Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb, who pleaded guilty to driving while ability impaired nearly 2 years after he crashed his state-owned SUV on New Year's Eve 2019. He once insisted to me he needed a $40,000 taxpayer-funded vehicle.
I can't walk across New York State. You have to have transportation as a legislative leader because I represent the entire state.
Most of the disgraced lawmakers we just mentioned are collecting their state pensions. Even though most of them fleeced you while in office, all told, you have been paying them a total of just under $1 million a year. William Boylan, the only one of those lawmakers who is still alive and not collecting a New York State pension. As New York State lawmakers get set to consider giving themselves a $32,000 raise, it's important to note that since early November, many of them have not been showing up in Albany for key meetings and hearings. Some who are not coming back to Albany next year have apparently decided to throw in the towel a little bit early, and you paid for it. They are the state lawmakers who did not win re-election or decided to retire, lame ducks, if you will. But they are not out of office yet. Their terms run until the end of the year. So why are they no-shows in Albany?
You were elected till the end of the year. You're elected for a 2-year term. Win or lose, this is your second year, and December 31st is your last day, and you have to continue working.
6 of them should have been at the Capitol for this November hearing on the mental health of college students. They are on the committees holding this hearing, mental health and higher ed, but they are not here.
I think you work up until the end. That's what you should do. That's what you're getting paid for.
We checked the legislative office building for some of the lawmakers who were missing in action. No one home at the office of lame duck Assemblywoman Judy Griffin. We found nothing but locked doors. The office of the retiring Michael Cusick also locked up tight on this hearing day. So we emailed each of the 6 soon-to-be ex-lawmakers who declined to attend the mental health hearing. We asked them where they were on the day of that critical hearing.
It's not like their ideas suddenly don't have any value after they lose an election.
Only 2 replied. Longtime member Richard Gottfried, who is retiring, his office said he had previously scheduled commitments and admitted frankly that since he's retiring, he didn't need to be at a hearing about future needs. Judy Griffin, who lost her bid for re-election, said she did not receive enough notice to make it to the hearing.
If you're on these committees, you got to take it very seriously. This is where the legislation comes from. You hear from people, you hear from organizations. If you're not here to receive that information, how could you possibly come up with legislation? How can you possibly serve the people you represent?
The Mental Health Commissioner, Anne-Marie Sullivan, testified at that hearing in question. Is it frustrating there are so few of them there?
Well, actually, I thought there was a pretty good turnout for a mental health hearing.
It tells you something about attendance at Albany when she said she was not troubled by the turnout.
And I think the ones that were there were really interested, and that's the important thing.
Now, each of the lawmakers leaving office at the end of the year continues to receive a $110,000 salary right up through December 31st, whether they show up for work at Albany or not.